All right, so we're going to be talking about lesser-known cults tonight. This is just kind of a big wrap-up, a big summary thing for some that we didn't get to on the main sessions. These are, well, how do I put that? These are cult groups. They're certainly not Christian, and they range from claiming to be Christian and not really being Christian to many of their adherents not knowing anything about Christianity. We call them lesser, though, because they're very confined, or they have a very small following, or they're just not in the media a lot. Some of these groups are bigger than Scientologists, but Scientology is in the media a lot. You know, people know about that. A lot of these groups, people know, if they've even heard of them, they know very little, and took a while to get this together because I had to go through and basically start from scratch and learn because I hardly knew anything about any of these groups. So, first off, before we get started, there's 5 symbols up there. Those are 5 that we're talking about tonight. Anybody recognize any of those symbols without cheating and looking at your papers? Anybody want to guess at what they are?
Well, the one that looks like a stool, I've seen that symbol, but I don't remember what it is.
The top right one there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very common in Japan, a lot of Eastern cultures. You see those, and they're like big archways. Yeah. Yep. Anything else look familiar? No, you see them as we go through. All right. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each group. We're going to give a short history. Then we're going to talk a little about what they believe, explain exactly why it's a cult, in other words, why they're not Christian. And then we're going to just give, instead of going through a long list, we're going to give one piece of advice if you were to meet somebody of that particular faith. It's unlikely that you will, but just one piece of advice if you were to meet someone who adhered to that. So we're going to start off with a group called Christian Science. Anybody know anything about a group called Christian Science? Ever heard of that?
Yeah. They don't go to doctors.
You are right. They do not go to doctors.
You see something about them in the media once in a while because somebody has got real sick and they're going to die, and somebody taking them to court because they won't go to the doctor. Yes,
that's very common in Christian Science. And actually, they've had to change their stances on some things because of all the pressure they've received from that very instance. I think their headquarters is in Boston, I believe. That is their main central church building. Quite impressive. Very pretty. It's interesting they call themselves Christian Scientists because they're not Christian and they're not scientists, neither one, but they call themselves Christian Scientists. Let's just talk about a short history. It all started with this woman named Mary Baker Eddy. Now, Mary Baker Eddy, she was a lady who was very mentally and emotionally disturbed. She had a lot of traumatizing experiences in her life. She had a lot of bad things happen to her, and it left her very disturbed. But basically, Christian Science started when she claimed that she discovered it. It was in 1866. She had fallen and landed on ice and hurt herself very severely, is what she said. And she survived from that. Now, the story she tells and that Christian scientists tell, was that she fell on the ice. The doctor looked at her. She damaged herself so bad, the doctor said, "You have 3 days to live." A few days later, she opened up her Bible and she read a passage out of the Bible about Jesus healing a paralytic man. Finally, she just declared that she was not sick anymore. And with that, her illness went away and she got up and walked away, perfectly healthy, and went on to live. Now, problem with that is she wrote letters to several people about that incident, and she records it different ways in different times. And it seems that really her life was never in danger from the start. She just fell and hurt her back. So a big part of Christian Science is basically getting over illness. And we'll explain exactly what they think about that. They were big on the mind science movement, which is a really big thing, early of the 20th century. Mind science was basically this idea that the human mind is capable of a whole lot more. We can progress beyond what we are now if we can just unlock the potential in our mind. But in the 60s and in the 80s and 90s, there were some big declines in Christian Science and their population, the people that attended their churches. And they've had to revise their philosophy because a big part of their philosophy is you don't need doctors, right? And actually, like Charles said, there's been some lawsuits and some issues. They used to teach if you're sick, if something's wrong, you don't go to a doctor, you don't get surgery, you don't do certain things. And some people actually died from that, and so they had to start revising how they taught that. So the real core of it here, let's talk about the general info of Christian Science. The real core of the claim is that evil, suffering, illness, sin, all these things don't actually exist. The claim is that they are non-existent. They're all psychosomatic. You guys know what psychosomatic is?
In your mind.
Yeah. It's in your head. You think about something, you worry about being sick so much that you make yourself sick. That's a psychosomatic illness. You're not really sick aside from the fact that you make yourself sick. What's that?
Hypochondriac.
Yeah, basically. Their claim is that every illness, every suffering, every problem that human beings have, even to some extent death itself, it's all up here. And if we could just get our mind straightened out, we wouldn't have any of these things. So that's the claim of Christian Science, which is somewhat problematic. Like I said, they got into a lot of trouble for pushing that. For years, they wouldn't let you seek any medical treatment if you were one of them. They changed that over time, though, because lawsuits. Any questions so far?
How many people are in this religion?
Not very many today. I'm trying to think. I read numbers. I want to say it's less than it. It's at the most maybe only a few 100,000 at the most. And they're very spread out. You can actually you can get online. You can look up all their different reading centers and their healing centers and counselors and everything. And there's none around here. I think there's some like up in Christiansburg and probably Winston-Salem. I don't know. But
have their own little magazine.
They do that. They probably do. Yeah.
Christian Science.
Yep. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, real quick, let's talk about why Christian Science is a cult. For actually quite a few reasons. Once you get into their doctrine and into their theology, you see quite a few problems with Christian Science. For one thing, they deny the Trinity. They deny the deity of Jesus. They deny that Jesus ever actually died, because keep in mind, things like suffering and illness and death, those are just illusions in the mind. They deny the need for atonement. So in other words, we don't need to go to Christ for atonement. All we have to do is realize that sin is just an illusion, because they don't believe in sin even. They deny a personal God. They are borderline pantheistic. Anybody remember what pantheism is? Yeah, basically it's the idea that everything is God or has God in it. And they're not strong on that, but they kind of teeter on that a little bit. So, they deny a personal God pretty much. Denial of hell, denial of the existence of sin. And they claim that they can be saved apart from Christ. You just have to realize that all your problems and illnesses are not really there. Yeah. It's kind of strange, but there are people who adhere to it. Let me read you one quote here. This is by Matt Slick. He is the president of CARM, which is Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry. Matt Slick said this about Christian Scientists. He said, Christian Science is so foreign to the Bible that if it didn't use words like Jesus, Trinity, love, grace, sin, etc., you'd never suspect it had anything to do with the Bible at all. It's really strange because they claim to be Christian. They claim that the Bible's valuable. They claim the writings of Mary Baker Eddy are just as valuable, though. But they really distort everything, and their focus is not really on biblical concepts and biblical truth. Their focus is just on getting everything right up here. So, rather strange group. If you had to have one piece of advice for reaching a Christian Scientist, if you were to ever reach one, it's possible you'd meet one at some point. There are around, there's just not a lot. Best thing you can do is you can challenge their understanding of Scripture in light of sound biblical interpretation. All right? What the Bible actually says, because the Bible says one thing, their tendency is to really twist it and try to fit it into their frame of reference, into their mindset. If you can really challenge their understanding of the Bible and what it actually means, that might be the best thing you can do for them. Okay, any questions on Christian Science?
So we have to tell them that God loves them.
Well, we do, yes. And that they're not God.
All this is in your head. You get your head right, and why would you ever die?
I honestly don't know. My guess is that they're probably thinking that when you die, you're not really dying, you're moving to another plane of existence. I'm not really sure exactly how they explain death. Mary Baker Eddy, she's dead. She's been dead for a long time. I'm not really sure how they would explain that exactly. They'd probably explain it as when someone we know dies, it looks to us like they're dead, but they're not really. It's just this illusion in our mind too, because we've gotten into it. Mary Baker Eddy did claim to have healed many, many, many people. She had all these accounts of people that she healed. Interestingly enough, I forgot to mention this, when they questioned her on it, when she was questioned and people said, well, here's a case, it's the exact same illness that you claimed you healed in this person, can you heal that? She refused to every time. There's not really any evidence that any of the claims of it were real, but there were people that did, that still believe it, so.
You said that they had healing centers. What goes on in the healing center? How do they?
I guess it's not like a healing center so much as like a counseling center. I use probably the wrong word there. They have reading centers where you go and you sit and you read their literature, and they have counseling centers where you go and you speak to somebody who basically tries to work you through. It's almost like a psychologist working you through realizing that, well, you're sick because you think you're sick. Mm-hmm. It's helping you that way. And truth be told, people probably walk away from these things, do feel better, because they talk about things and they feel like something good is going on and they believe something good. And so it psychosomatically, it makes them feel better. They feel good for a time. Doesn't mean it cures them though. Any other questions? All right. Let's go on to a group that we've all heard of, I'm sure, called New Age. What do we know about New Age? Anything?
Nothing.
When you hear the word New Age, what comes to mind?
Something our generation's come up with.
Actually, it was more so our parents' generation, and actually that was inspired by our grandparents' generation, but.
Well, at least we can't be held responsible.
No, we can't be, well, there's some crazy stuff here. You think of like crystal balls and all these things like that. I don't know. All right. Let's talk a little about New Age. It's very much, well, I guess I'll sum it up here in a minute. The New Age movement began basically, you can't call it a single cult. It's actually a group of a whole bunch of different cults. Very, very big in like the 60s and 70s, right? You ever watch the show Adam 12, which was in the early 70s? That was a lot of the problem. They had to deal with a lot of those crazy New Age, kids getting into crazy New Age cults a lot. Because that was an actual problem back then. Well, you have all these collections of cults together, and the only thing that unifies them is they believe a few consistent things, and we'll get into that in a minute. They're very diverse in a lot of other ways. It started with a lot of weird kind of cultish groups from the start. Theosophical Society, Anthroposophy, all these different weird groups, mind science, like what Christian Science came out of, things like that. And they all kind of blended their ideas together, and then they were influenced they took up like Spiritism, just an interest in general spiritual realm without any real direction, popular psychology, scientific breakthroughs, and definitely contemporary social concerns, things that were big discussions at the time became a big part of that. And they just kind of blended it all together, and the result was all these different New Age cults. Okay? If you had to describe New Age in some way, the best way you could describe it is materialistic Western Hinduism. That sounds really strange. It's basically, C.S. Lewis said that the two great religions, in other words, the two most influential religions in the world, are Christianity and Hinduism. They're very different, and they influence a whole lot of things. And New Age is basically influenced by Hinduism. It's a bunch of kind of spoiled, rich American kids who like a lot of the ideas of Hinduism and the Hindu philosophy and the sort of mystical side to it. But at the same time, we don't really want to be ascetics like a lot of Hindus. We don't want to give up our stuff. And so we just kind of mix it with Western culture, and we're still materialistic about it. So it becomes materialistic Western Hinduism. That sounds kind of muddled. Do we have any questions so far?
How large is it?
There is no way to tell. It is, it was really big back in the 60s and 70s. It dropped. It's kind of becoming bigger now as my generation now, like Justin said, our generation is picking up more of an interest in just kind of general spirituality without any real direction. But it's really hard to tell because, like I said, it's not like a defined church or a defined movement. It's all these different crazy thoughts. So.
What caused that?
What caused what?
That whatever.
The New Ageism?
Yeah. All that crap they put up their nose back in.
Put up their nose?
Drugs.
Oh, yeah. Well, you might, don't be surprised to find that there's probably a connection between a lot of drug use and a lot of New Age stuff too.
Issues today are, I mean, we knew what the issues were in the 60s, but
well,
social issues, I mean,
yeah, a lot of it's probably a lot of the same social issues, but a big part of what you see now, and actually we're going to talk in a little bit about a specific example that's becoming very popular right now, and that's more so just on kind of the occult practices that they have. Is a big emphasis on that and just kind of, it very much takes a blend of psychology and general spiritism and like popular science and kind of mixes it all together. And they do that still today. Any other questions I can try to answer? Okay. General info on this. Basically, there's a few universal concepts in New Age. Okay. And this is pretty much any New Age person is going to believe in at least these things. They're going to believe that humanity is on the brink of an evolutionary spiritual breakthrough. You know, we've kind of hit a ceiling and we're about to break through the ceiling and just really explode into like this spiritual realm and spiritual beings that, you know, we never knew we were capable of before. That's the idea. They believe very much monism, which is a Hindu concept, that one is all, basically everything is all the same. Picture of the girl, what's she doing? She's hugging a tree. Why? Because it's all the same. The trees are just our brothers and sisters. We're all the same thing, right? It's big emphasis on pantheism, the belief that everything is God. And so, of course, we're all God, trees are all God, everything's all God all together, so we're all one and the same. And they're all pretty much universally are subjective moral standards. They don't think there's any absolute moral standard. It's just different views of how to go about your life. Now, the thing that gets disturbing about New Age, and it's strange beliefs, but the thing that gets disturbing is a lot of the practices that are done in it. They're very much occult practices. Do you guys know what I mean by occult? Basically, practices that are pretty much forbidden. Biblically, are forbidden of us. Things like channeling spirits and speaking to other spirits and trying to speak to the dead and trying to read crystal balls and read the future, things like that. Those are occult practices, and that's very, very big in New Age. They promote astrology. You guys know what astrology is, right? Where you open your newspaper to the astrology section, and it says, if you were born in this date, this will happen. The thing that's most unbelievable to me about astrology is the fact that everybody born within these dates is going to have the same thing happen to them every day. So that's what confuses me. Channeling, they try to speak to basically spirits at times. There's a lot of demonic influence on this, which is very disturbing. And UFOs is sometimes a big thing in New Age. And they actually try to channel UFOs. They think they can use their bodies to channel and speak to aliens that are flying around in spaceships up there. It's out there. So, any questions so far? All right. Why is it a cult? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. By the way, that's just a joke. Intolerance will not be tolerated. Anybody see a problem with that? That's very much the mentality of groups like New Agers. It really is. Number of reasons. They deny a personal God because they're very pantheistic. They believe everything is God, right? They deny the creator-creature role. They don't see God and creation as two separate things. They kind of see them as all melding together. They don't see a need for salvation because, again, they don't believe in sin, right? They don't believe that there's actually things that are really wrong. They don't see Christ as the unique Son of God. If he's the Son of God, he's the Son of God in the same sense that we are all children of God, is what they would say. They don't believe Jesus is the only path to salvation. Salvation just kind of comes as you follow your own path and you do your own thing. Of course, they don't believe in objective morality, and they promote terrible practices that can be kind of dangerous at times. Channeling, witchcraft, general occult, things like that are very big in New Age. So, one piece of advice for reaching a New Ager is you have to gently, because again, if they think you're being hostile at all, it's why you hate me, you're so intolerant, you bigot. But you have to very gently prompt them to re-examine their worldview and its contradictions. Because their worldview really does have a lot of contradictions in it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And you need to gently get them thinking in a more logical pattern. Any questions so far? Okay, there is a modern example of New Age. It's a movement that's just been out for a few years and it's becoming very big now. And you may have seen or heard something of it, especially if you spend time on the internet, if you have Facebook or YouTube, something like that. A modern example is something called spirit science. Anybody heard of that? This is an example of one of many New Age cults, and this is just a very new one, but it's nothing really new about it. It's just the same old New Age concepts, rehashed and repurposed. If you get on Facebook, who in here has Facebook? Anybody? A few people. If you watch Facebook and all the things that people will share and the posts they'll put up, every now and then you'll see like these pictures like that with a quote on it, and there'll be a little, it's hard to see, in the bottom corner and the bottom in the middle, it'll say spirit science. And what they do is they take these interesting sounding quotes, like, he who has never hoped can never despair. Something, I am not like everyone. I don't pretend to be. I don't want to be. I am me. People say, oh, that's so me. That describes me. It's just kind of there's not a lot of substance to those things, but it's just something that makes people feel good and they kind of like it, and so they share it. And that's just kind of how they get people interested in their group. They post
bottom right.
What, the bottom right?
The green one.
Admit it when you're wrong and shut up. Admit it when you're wrong and shut up when you're right. This is a simple way to drastically improve the quality of your relationships. And see, people say, well, that's great advice. That's me. But they don't realize where it's coming from, though. So this is an actual quote from their website, that quote in the middle. Consciousness is the understanding that you are more than your physical body. You are a conscious being that is one with everything in reality, and that the experience is the reason for doing anything. That's one of the main things they have on their website, Spirit Science website. There's not really anyway, it's something that just slowly introduces these ideas to people and gets them into a New Age thought. And actually, if you go to their website, they have classes you can read through and take classes and watch videos, and it teaches you how to do things like channel, how to, meditate in certain ways and things like that. And it's kind of disturbing, but people get into it because, again, we don't really know what it is. People are not aware of what it is. But it's a good modern example of New Age. Any questions so far? Okay. Here's a fun one. Rastafari. What do we know about Rastafari? Anything?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. That's because you don't find it in America very much. And you don't find it in any of the countries you've ever been to very much either. Unless you've been to Jamaica. Big in Jamaica. Any idea what Rastafari is? I think Rastafari is unique because you will find it is remarkable how similar it is to Christianity, and at the same time it's remarkable how different it is from Christianity too. Let me ask you something. How would you feel if one day a bunch of people started saying that you were God? What would you do? Would you tell them they were wrong? I hope you would. Now, what happens if you tell them that they're wrong and that you're not God, and they say, oh, you're just being modest. We know who you really are. How would you feel about that? That's basically the basis for the Rastafari belief. You talk to a Rastafari person, they will tell you they're not a religion, but basically they're a religion. Short history. It all started with what's called the Pan-Africanism movement in the late 1920s in Jamaica. This was a time when, racial tensions were really high. People of African descent still had it pretty rough. And they needed sort of a unifying movement, something to build them up and strengthen them. And so this Pan-Africanism movement came around that drew all of them their attention back to Africa, because that's where African descended people came from. The movement basically emphasized, this is your motherland, this is where you're from, this is where all your hopes are, just focus back on Africa. Well, some problems came about. In 1930, a new emperor was crowned in Ethiopia. His name was Haile Selassie, I think is his name. I may be pronouncing that wrong. When he was crowned emperor in Africa, and many of these people who were kind of adhering to this Pan-Africanism movement, they were Christianish, they were Christian or Christianized, they had a high respect for Christianity. But then, when this guy came to the throne in Ethiopia, they began claiming that he was Jesus returned. They said that he was the returned Messiah. And he told them, no, I'm not. And they said, yeah, you are. And he said, no, I'm not. And they say, oh, you're just being modest. Only God would be so modest as to say he wasn't God. So they insisted, even though he denied it, they insisted that he was Jesus returned. And they began to worship this emperor of Ethiopia, even though they lived in Jamaica for the most part. This was going on in Jamaica. Now, over the years, they kind of developed into two groups. There was the Christian-ish group that believed that Selassie was Jesus, and then there was a sort of a more Hindu pantheistic group that's separate. We're focusing mostly on the Christian-ish group, though. So they developed some strange beliefs and strange practices, and a lot of it centered around the fact that they believed he was Jesus returned. So, let's talk about some of the beliefs of Rastafari. They believe that Selassie, now he's dead now, but they believe he's going to return one day and bring people into Africa, bring all of his faithful followers into Africa. And there's basically going to be sort of like a heaven, but it's going to be in Africa, basically. And they're just going to live forever. They do believe that people of African descent are the 12 tribes of Israel. They believe that all the tribes mentioned in the Bible were all black, even though they weren't. They were Jewish. They believed that they were all black. They think that Selassie, as the Messiah, is the direct descendant of Solomon. Do you guys remember in the Bible, there's a story about the Queen of Sheba going to visit Solomon, and he sent her back with a great treasure? They claimed that great treasure was he had impregnated her, and he went back and she had children, and his lineage was going out in Ethiopia, and eventually that became Selassie. Anyway, they believe very strongly in discussing social political issues, especially pertaining to blacks and Africa. Very, very big on social issues and ethnic movements and things that are going on in Africa and things that relate to people of African descent. This is one of their iconic and strange beliefs. They do believe that marijuana enlightens their mind to spiritual realities. So they smoke marijuana to think that it makes them more aware of spiritual realities. Now, not all Rastafari do that, but a lot of them do. Most of them do. Very commonly, they have dreadlocks. They believe that dreadlocks are a symbolic of a lion's mane. They're very big because original 12 tribes, Lion of Judah, the symbol of the nation of Judah was, of the tribe of Judah was a lion. So they're big on Lion of Judah. In fact, there's a certain famous rapper you may have heard of. His name was once Snoop Dogg. Have you heard of him? He went to Jamaica and converted to Rastafari and changed his name to Snoop Lion. Again, Lion of Judah, big emphasis there. They do believe that half of the Bible was hidden away to oppress black people, but you can find that hidden away half of the Bible in your heart if you follow the teachings of Rastafari. And actually, I put that wrong. Rastafarianism is what I put up there, and a Rastafari person would take a lot of offense to that. They don't like Rastafarianism, they're Rastafari. They're very, very particular about that. But they do believe very strongly in the Bible. They just don't understand it very well, but they do believe very strongly in it. And they have certain moral issues they're very strong on, too. Also, they have certain diets where they eat only certain things because I like the philosophy behind it because they want to take care of their body. They believe their body is a temple and they want to take care of it. Anyway, so some strange stuff. Any questions so far about Rastafari? Okay. Why it's a cult? It's really only a couple things, but they're doozies. They're big ones. The ones that are of the Christian-like branch, they're a cult because they're worshiping someone who's not Jesus as if he were Jesus. The rest of them are Hindu pantheistic. They believe that man is God. So that's pretty much the big reasons why they're a cult. Even though they would tell you they're not even a religion, but they basically are. Okay, one piece of advice for reaching a Rastafari, get them focused on salvation instead of social, political, ethnic issues. Salvation is not something that's forefront in the minds of Rastafari people. They're not thinking, boy, I hope I can live up to God's standards. I hope I want to be cleansed of my sins so that I can be right before God. Their thoughts are, well, look at what's going on in this issue. Look at how the politics are going here. Look at what happened to people over here in this nation. That's their focus. And they say just get them on the core issue. Get them on salvation. Questions, comments? There's some interesting ones out there, aren't there? Okay. Only two more. Here's one that, this is one I always looked at growing up. I didn't know a whole lot about them. I thought, well, they're just Christian. They're different Christians. They're kind of way out there Christians, but probably some of them are still Christian. And that's Unitarian Universalists. What do we know about Unitarian Universalists? Anything?
Just heard the name.
Just heard the name. You probably drive by and see their churches. Actually, when I think it was while we were in college in Knoxville there was a shooting at the local Unitarian Universalist church, I believe. I think it was that one. Anyway, somebody came in and actually started shooting people in the church. And they were doing, it was during a Christmas play, but it wasn't actually like a Christmas play. It was a production of the play Annie, which you normally don't see in churches, but you do see things like that a lot in Universalist church. So, let's look at the name. What does it mean? Unitarian first. What's Unitarian?
Together.
Kinda. There's a theological concept that's really important for Christianity, and it's the opposite. Well, it's not the opposite, but it's different from Unitarianism. We are not Unitarian. Unitarian basically means that they don't believe in the Trinity. We are Trinitarian. They are Unitarian, right? So they deny the Trinity. So that's, that right there, they've already violated one of the essential Christian doctrines. Now, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you don't believe that Jesus is the God, who's Jesus then? Either he's not God, or you have to say that there's multiple gods and you're a polytheist. In the case of these guys, they say that he's not God. So they say that there's no Trinity, and they say that Jesus is not God. Now, what is universalism? That idea. It's the idea that deals with salvation. It's basically the idea that everybody's saved. You don't have to have Jesus. In their case, you don't have to have Jesus to be saved. It's just, you do whatever, find your own path, and you get salvation on your own. Don't worry about it. So, they've denied the Trinity. They've denied that Jesus is God. So they've denied the deity of Christ. And they've denied the need for salvation through Christ. They violated 3 different areas of essential Christian doctrine, and all we've done is talk about their name so far. They're off to a pretty bad start. Let's talk a little about the history of Unitarian Universalists. Started off a modern Unitarian movement. There's always been ideas of Unitarianism, but the modern Unitarian movement goes back to a lot of strong anti-Trinitarian people. Faustus Socinus, that's that guy right there. And a lot of it started up in I want to say like Sweden or Norway, a lot of those northern European countries, and kind of moved down south. John Biddle, he was English, I believe. William Ellery Channing was the guy who finally founded the American Unitarian Association. So he founded, it was a church group, but it wasn't Christian because they're Unitarian, but they, it was in America. He finally started the official church of Unitarian people. Now since then, the movement has continued to slip. It already wasn't Christian to start with, but the movement has slipped further and further and further from Orthodox Christianity. It's kind of taken on a lot of different ideas. It used to be in sort of this rationalist humanism. Then it kind of transitioned to like this spiritualist, general spiritual movement, and that's where it is today. So, general info on Unitarian Universalist. Today, they are pretty much open to any spiritual philosophy. I mean, be it some aspects of Christianity, although they're very closed off to many aspects of Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, name it, whatever it is. They're open to all these different religious ideas, and they take them all in, and they consider many of them to be, to be as valid or more valid than Christian doctrine, and traditional Christian beliefs. Pretty much, you'll find a wide range of beliefs in Unitarian Universalism. Pretty much the only things that unite them is, first off, they're a structure, they're a church structure, an official organization. And second, they pretty much hate anything that goes back to conservative theology or ethics or anything like that. And those are pretty much the only consistent threads you see running through them. But they're still a church built very much on those things. They'll consider things like the Vedas, the Quran, the Lotus Sutra to be just as useful as the Bible. They emphasize human experience. In other words, if you feel it, it must be true. If you've been through this and you think this is the case, well, that must be the way it is. And interestingly enough, they have turned to a big evangelism push. They were declining very bad there for a little bit. And they picked up this big push for evangelism. And it's funny because they actually had to copy the evangelism methods of a lot of Christian churches. And they started seeing some increases, but now they've started to decrease again. People don't stay in a real liberal theology school like that. People don't stay in that kind of religious base very much because you go to church, why? For people to tell you don't need to go to church and there's nothing you need to do different in your life. Why am I going to go then? So, yeah. Again, you kind of get into that mentality, everything's acceptable. Unless you disagree with this, then that's completely unacceptable. But other than that, everything's acceptable. Yeah. Any questions so far? Okay.
The reason maybe some of their decline is because we were created want God in our lives. So if everybody's telling you everything's just hunky-dory and just do whatever you feel like and it don't make any difference, they still never find what they're looking for to fill that void, so that they just quit going there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that's a big part of it, is they get there, they're hoping to find some sort of spiritual fulfillment, and the person says, oh, don't worry about it, you're already fulfilled. And they say, well, it's very empty. It really is empty, philosophy and empty comfort. So. Any other questions?
Is that actually a shawl that they wear?
Yes. That is an actual Unitarian Universalist ministry. Well, you see,
They have a stamp for everything.
yin yang, Eastern philosophy, cross, Christianity. You've got Islam, the crescent moon of Islam. You've got the Om symbol top left. That's Hinduism. Oh man, you got everything. They're okay with it all. Mm-hmm. They have services. They have services. They're meet in a building that looks something like our churches, but they're not. The services are not centered like ours are. No.
Where does a guy like him go to college?
I have no idea. Anyway, any other questions? Okay, why it's a cult. Actually, before we get to that, look at that poem on the left side. That was written by a Unitarian Universalist minister. He said, "Come return to your place in the pews and hear our heretical views." He's proud of the fact that they're heretical. You were not born in sin, so lift up your chin. You have only your dogmas to lose. That's actually a very good expression of Unitarian Universalist belief. Very accurate. So anyway, they, of course, deny the Trinity. They deny a personal God. Some of them, again, are very pantheistic because why not be Hindu, right? They deny the deity of Christ. They deny any need for salvation because if you're doing something, whatever you're doing, it's okay. They deny Christ as a sole path of salvation, and they promote moral relativism. So for looking a lot like Christians on the very surface level, they're actually quite different once you get down into it.
Well, these cults don't believe in God. They don't believe in Christ. And they don't believe in the need for salvation. Why do they say you were not born in sin? Why is sin even there? That's another thing. Universalists are very big on distancing themselves from Orthodox Christianity. Good, solid Christian doctrine like we adhere to, we believe in something like sin. And they want to be as far away from that as possible. And they're proud. He says, our heretical views. They're proud of that. They're proud of the fact that we look at them and say, are you serious? That's crazy, That's just, it's a mentality that really likes to cause controversy and likes to
likes to mess with people.
Usually things that you bring to, usually things that you want to talk about are things that you really have a problem with. How many people like that?
Okay. So one piece of advice, if you ever meet a Unitarian Universalist, which could happen, there's several, trying to think how many there are. I actually saw statistics on it. I looked them up, and they are declining somewhat now, but there's not a whole lot. I think it's less than 1 million, I believe. Anyway, piece of advice is focus on the unique nature of Jesus. They believe that Buddha and Muhammad and everybody is just as valid as Jesus. In reality, factually speaking, Jesus was something very special, much better than all of them. Focus on the supremacy of Christ and on his unique nature. He was not just like every other religious leader. He was unique. There was something different about him. Okay. Questions or comments so far? One more to talk about, and this is one that we are very unlikely to run into unless you travel abroad a lot, and that's Shinto. Do we know anything about Shinto? What'd you say? Japan. It is the national religion of Japan. In fact, everything about Shinto is Japan. In fact, Shinto doesn't make a lot of sense if it's not in Japan, actually, because it's just a Japanese identity very much. Shinto. This is the traditional religion of Japan, and it's more of a cultural thing, really, almost than anything else. Short history of Shinto. It started off, it's really uncertain, because Shinto was being formed and was really even being established and nationalized before Japan had a system of writing. It was not until after Shinto was established that the Chinese came over and introduced their system of writing to Japan, and the Japanese made their own system based on it. So we don't have written history records. We can just kind of guess and piece it together. Best guess, we know in 4th century there was a Japanese emperor who was over most of the island there. And chances are he probably unified all the different beliefs. They were just different general beliefs and different gods, somewhat like pagan beliefs probably. At the time, he unified them all together into a state religion to kind of help control them. A big part of Shinto is they believe that the emperor of Japan, or they don't so much anymore, but they did at one point, believe that the emperor of Japan was descended from the chief goddess or the sun goddess. I think it was right after World War II, they made the emperor actually, deny that. But he probably started that in order to give validity. He said, I should be the emperor because I'm descended from, Amaterasu or whatever her name is, the sun goddess. Amaterasu, that's it. And through the years, Shinto has changed. Again, you're kind of nailing Jello to a wall. It's picked up aspects of Buddhism and then separated from Buddhism, and picked up Confucianism and separated from it. It's gone every which way. And the result is today, a typical Japanese home has influence of Shinto and Buddhism and folk religion and Taoism and all these different things. In fact, there's a scholar who's an expert on Eastern religion. His name is H. Byron Earhart, and he said this about people living in Japan and people who adhere to Shinto. A person might be married in a Shinto shrine, live his life according to Confucian social teachings, hold to some Taoistic beliefs about lucky and unlucky, participate in folk festivals, and have his funeral conducted by a Buddhist temple. That's very common in Japan. It's just because the religion is it's as much cultural and as much a part of just regular day-to-day practice and culture as it is an actual religious belief. So let's talk a little about general info real quick on Shinto. Like I said, it's just Japanese belief. They believe in kamis, which are like spirits or like gods, basically. They believe that there are gods everywhere. They believe a general animism, which, they think that there's spirits in lots of things. You see these two rocks there with a big rope between them? They look in nature for things that are unique, like those rocks look unique, especially if there's two, because they believe that these kamis, these gods, come in two. And so they believe that those rocks will be inhabited by kamis, or by gods, basically. And so there's two paragods. They tie a rope there to symbolize there's something special and spiritual about that location. So they hold a kind of an animism. There's spirits and beings everywhere. And they're also very big on ancestor-based Spiritism, it's very much about honoring your ancestors. They'll build shrines to their deceased ancestors, their great-grandfather or something like that. So, traditionally, they taught that Japan was the first island. This was actually a religious belief that really promoted kind of an elitism in Japan. Traditionally, Shinto taught that the first of all Earth ever made was the island of Japan, and they have this whole mythology behind how it was created. And so Japan was the divine land, and they believed that the people of Japan were descended from the gods. It's rooted in national identity. It has a strong corporate mentality. So in other words, if you're a Japanese person, your nation of Japan, you're connected to Shinto through your nation. It's a corporate mentality. So through my community and the people around me, I'm connected to Shinto. It plays a role in many aspects, day-to-day life. Every part of my day connected to Shinto. And it's practiced actually mostly not in the Shinto shrines, but in the home is the main place Shinto is practiced. So again, even in my own home, it's Shinto. So it's very, very deeply rooted there. But basically, it's a general spiritism. They believe in gods and spirits everywhere. Questions, comments? Okay, why is it a cult? That picture right there, those are two gods that are supposed to be responsible for creating Japan. The guy with the spear there, they're a husband and wife. The guy with the spear, well, they're not husband and wife at that point. The guy with the spear ends up dipping his spear into like this goo, and as he pulls it out, it drips out and lands on the water, and that creates the island of Japan. And they go down and perform a marriage ceremony, and she messes up because she talks. Apparently women aren't supposed to talk, and she ends up giving birth to like this dragon or something. Anyway, big crazy mythology behind all that. It gets crazier than that, but I'll let you borrow the book sometime if you want. Why it's a cult? Denial of monotheism. They believe there are lots of gods. Denial of Jesus as the Savior. Walk up to your typical Japanese Shinto and you say, hey, so what do you think about Jesus? And they say, who? They have no idea who you're talking about. There's no concept of salvation need. They don't see this great need to be reunited with God. Their denial of the creator-creature role. They don't see our role to God the same as we should. And denial of salvation in Christ. We don't find salvation through Him. Okay. One piece of advice for reaching Shinto is you have to focus on the corporate nature of the church. I've spoken with missionaries before that have been over to Japan, and they say it is very, very difficult to reach Japanese people for Christ. It is exceedingly difficult. And that's because as Westerners, we think really different from them. All right. I'd argue that our system of thinking and logic is better in a lot of ways, but we think very different. We think individualism. We think, Jesus died for you. You need to, turn to Christ so that you can be forgiven of your sin. We present it individual, and the salvation in Christ is not that individualistic. There's a corporate nature to it, but we present it very individual. Japanese people are very communally focused. And they don't like that individuality we give to it. As Westerners, we like to focus, when we talk about Christ and the gospel, we like to focus on the problem. We like to identify. The problem is sin. The problem is we've rejected God. We've turned on Him. Japan, they're more solution-focused than problem-focused. And so presenting it in terms of this is the problem does not appeal to them well. And like I said, Shinto takes up every aspect of their day-to-day life. It's very deeply rooted. And so going up to, let me put it this way. Let's assume you moved to a new neighborhood and you were looking for a church. And you found a church and they were great, solid doctrine. They had everything on exactly what you were looking for. And you said, we want to join the church. They say, okay, you can join the church, but first you're going to have to renounce your American citizenship. You're going to have to leave your family and never speak to them again. And you're going to have to give up on your culture. That culture you come from in Galax, Virginia, it might as well be dead to you. Are you going to join that church? Now, that's not what we tell Shinto people to do, but that's very much how they perceive Christianity coming in on them. It's not what it is, but it's a very threatening thing to them. Okay. Questions or comments at all? A lot of information in one night. Here's general information, or the information if you want the sources. You can get them also in your booklet. Things are switched around because I went in and added Shinto at the end also. No questions, anything we talked about tonight? Are you glad that you're a Christian? I'm glad my religion and my worldview makes a lot of sense.